You guys can hear me fine?
Yep.
Okay.
La gente que más se siente sola y solos es la gente que nos busca esa hermandad para poder decir no estamos solos. In this town, in this community, this county, after all these years of strife throughout the valley, we were sent here to a little town by the name of Yolo. And I said, that's a cute little name, Yolo. Where in the heck is Yolo, you know? So, bottom line, my family, Elena came first with the kids. I was Caesar's assistant, working in La Paz. And after that, 73, all hell broke loose with all the strikes, throughout the valley, and the struggle began again. So we came here, we were assigned here, and lo and behold, we met many, many good people here. Many good people, especially here in Davis, that opened their doors, their home, and their beds, and fed us and clothed us. This is not the America in which we stood for and we fought so hard for. We're not going to allow hate, discrimination, and division in our community, because we're all one people. La palabra. No consuman este producto. Apoyen a esa misma gente. No hay ninguna razón porque la gente tenga que ser forzada a venirse a Estados Unidos, dejar su familia, dejar las tierras, dejar todo lo que es hasta sus vidas de sus seres humanos que están en México, y sus abuelos y sus padres y madres que quedan ahí, y se vienen para acá y no se pueden regresar. Pero, ¿cómo le vas a decir tú a algo? Se lo dije yo al presidente de la Riscos. ¿Cómo puedes dormir tú en la noche ganando lo que tú ganas bajo las espaldas de esa pobre gente? We're not just people that they call immigrants. We're human beings. No somos nada más inmigrantes ni emigrantes. Somos seres humanos. Somos individuos que tenemos el derecho de buscar la vida. Y esto lo hemos buscado y lo estamos haciendo en estableciendo y empoderando este país. Y le dijeron, no tienes vergüenza tú de que este señor te esté diciendo a ti lo que te mereces. Porque nosotros todos comemos todo lo que cosechan ellos, sabiendo que está pasando esto. Nos da pena que ustedes sigan así, pero la pena va a ser de esto de nosotros. No te vamos a comprar tus chingadas fresas, que te las traes tú o te tragas las que están tan podridas. Es nuestro derecho como consumidores. Me niego a sostener las prácticas inhumanas de una empresa norteamericana. Si se puede, viva la huelga. ¿Se puede? ¿Se puede?
Sí se puede. Sí se puede.
Gracias.
Wow, that was so powerful. And Desiree, so moving, and so sorry for the loss of your father this year. But we're here to talk about that legacy. It's quite a legacy to live up to, but you've also created your own legacy. And so I'd like to ask you a few questions about that. And to start out, could you please tell us about your father? I mean, that was a little glimpse, but also how he got started in organizing farm workers in California. What was it in his life that moved him into the movement?
Well, I have to say that I really love this question because this is the question that is the seed that made everything bloom into his life. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me on this very special program and to meet you, Senor Soto. It's an honor. And getting back to this question is that my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my parents were farm workers. They were farm workers as children, and they lived the injustice of working up to 12 hours a day, no breaks, no toilets, no water, harvesting fruits and vegetables up and down the West Coast, the Valley of California. And in my family, many stories were told even about our great uncles, our tios, my dad's tios, being a part of the 1933 Pixley huelgas in California. And in 1939, they started the deportation process and deporting everybody who was brown, indigenous people, de Mexico, Central America, but primarily Mexico, even though they worked and they were participating in the California economy. But with the Depression, of course, that meant that brown people, Black people, or immigrants weren't allowed to hold on to those agricultural jobs. So they started putting people on trains and forcing them back to Mexico. So this cycle has not ended, right? So while my father was harvesting broccoli in Oxnard, California, he began organizing with other people, and they organized the West Coast of California, farm workers, and fighting for the rights of farm workers, for decent pay, for jobs, less hours, tools and materials to work with. Often farm workers were required to show up, but they wouldn't supply gloves or the proper equipment, even proper ladders. And so there was a lot of injustices. And so my father, along with a handful of people, birthed the United Farm Workers Union out of Oxnard, California. And later on, there was a merge with the Larry Itlilong and AWOC and the Filipino workers, along with Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, Gilbert Padilla out of Delano. There was a merge and they formed the UFW of America, and they carried the Grape Boycott. And my family took the Grape Boycott to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And through our 12 years of being in the union, and as my parents as co-founders of this union, I was born into this movement. My earliest memory is 3 years old, and I'm selling huelga buttons and bumper stickers outside of a coffee can in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so my father and my mother were zealot UFW organizers. They believed 100% in what they were doing. They believed in social justice, but to also bring awareness of the suffering of farm workers harvesting these fruits and vegetables for a very low wage. And it meant that taking the Grape Boycott out of state, it also meant a huge sacrifice. My parents earned $5 a week as heads of the United Farm Workers Union. We suffered. We lived off of donated food, donated clothing, donated housing. I slept on more union halls as a child than I think ever on a bed. But my parents felt that they had to sacrifice for their people, for brown, native, raza, Chicanos, Latinos, Mexicanos, Blacks, whites, for poor people. Farm workers weren't just Mexicans. Farm workers were Black people, Filipino people, white people, Okies. They at Oklahoma, they were Japanese people, Chinese people, but they were immigrants for the most part, and they were also the poorest workers in the economy. So when we left the United Farm Workers Union after 12 years, my father began to see and feel the wider picture, and that there was a lot of unanswered questions about why there was such a huge demand for farm worker labor, and why there was this cycle of abuse of immigrants and farm worker immigrants. And the questions, the answers could only be found in Mexico. So he devoted over 40 years of his life in Mexico, building a labor bridge between the United States and Mexico, and uniting labor organizers and creating organizers to bring change, not only in Mexico, but also here as well. And so this grew into an international movement of encuentros, of educating people on foreign policies that affect workers here and also in Mexico. So I hope I answered that first question.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so because you're telling the story of the evolution of him as a person, as an organizer, which came with the increased knowledge based on his experience. And you touched upon being raised up in the movement, and being in these union halls and the organizing meetings. What was the earliest memory you have of that? How old were you probably at your earliest memories of that experience?
My earliest memory, my earliest memory, of course, was in Pittsburgh selling Huelga buttons. But I'd like to move forward. I would like to talk about my earliest memory of understanding what it is I was doing and what my part was in this movement.
Sure, go ahead.
I was 7 years old.
Wow.
And we were on the tomato strike here in Yolo County. And when you're in these meetings with my father, my mother, Dolores, Cesar, Marshall Gans, as a child, and you're listening, and you think you understand, you're hearing what's messages over and over, strategy, organizing concepts. But it wasn't until I was 7 years old that I understood enough to feel the animo and the drive to want to be a part of this great movement and to feel so empowered. And we were on the tomato strike in Yolo County, and we were picketing outside of a tomato field. And I heard my father talk to a then friend of ours, John Pamprin, who was out with us. We were out in a tomato field, and we were out there for 3 hours, and it was very hot. And my dad said, they're not coming off of the tomato machines. They're just not connecting. And I looked at my dad and I said, Dad, can I try? Can I get the bullhorn and try? He says, you want to do this? I said, yes. He says, what are you going to say? I said, in Spanish, I'm going to say, get off of the tomato machines. We need your help. We need you to be a member. We need you to join the strike. We can't do this without you. He says, you're going to say that, right? And I said, that's what you've been saying. He says, okay. He says, but why is it important for them, for the workers to come off of the tomato machines? I said, because if they don't win this strike, they're not going to get a better pay, and they're going to have to work longer. And I don't know about you, but I'm hungry and I want to go home. We've been out here for almost 5 hours. So let's get them off the machine. Let's go to DQU, where we were living at the time, the Native People's Reservation, and let's go home. And he said, okay, well, here's the bullhorn. So I did. I said, bájense de la máquina, join us. And they did. I stopped 3 tomato machines.
Wow.
And about 24 people walked out of the fields, and one old lady was crying. She said, to hear this little kid telling us to get off these machines, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to get off. What do you want from us now? What do we do next? And my dad was crying. He says, we want you to join the huelga, the strike, we want you to fill out these cards. We want you to come and hear what we have to say at DQU. We have food there. We're willing to feed you. Just listen to what we're saying. So
that must have felt really powerful at that age, as a revelation as to the power that you could have with your voice.
Well, it came out in the news, and it came out in the El Malcriado, and my mother, said, my children are organizers, they're huelguistas. You can't stop them. They're passing out flyers and talking to people, and at a young age, we started picking up the organizing skills of our parents, and I have to say that out of all my parents' children, I was the one that was at my dad's side the longest. I never left his side politically. Our journeys into Mexico and viewing elections, to partnering with other unions, attending meetings, and being on the strikes and the huelgas, and organizing encuentros against NAFTA, to the Driscoll boycott. I've been at my father's side. It's been a great honor, but most of all, it's been, a very, very emotional, very exhausting, and also a very life experience for me. One, to have such an amazing father, and 2, I felt like we grew together in many aspects. And there were moments when I would be very emotional, and I would cry, and I'd say, it feels like we're not winning. And he told me it wasn't by design for us to win. It was by design for us to pave the road so the next generation could win. And so that has stood with me forever. So
your father was full of these wisdoms, probably based on not only on what was taught to him, but the tremendous experiences he had. And then he's passing them down to you, because how interconnected your lives are. That I mean, just as a child of a parent, that's a tremendous honor. And to have a father so deep and so historical, now that you're older and he's now gone, reflecting on that, what do you now understand about the power of your father in his life, and what does that mean?
My understanding of my father, this great, enormous love, this pillar in my life, who not only was my father, he was my best friend, he was my comrade. There wasn't a day that went by that we weren't collaborating and writing and talking and organizing together. The most beautiful thing to me is his political evolution. He didn't stop with the UFW, he kept going. And in many ways, you can say he was the longest elder of brown people that had organized for so many years. Till his days before he died, he was still on the phone with friends, telling them, his thoughts about strategy, about organizing in Mexico. His love was Mexico, the workers in Mexico and San Quintin, and the Driscoll boycott. His evolution of understanding what forced migration was about, understanding why, capitalism and why systemic racism was important to corporations to enslave people, and to understand what that meant internationally, what it understand with the connections with the Central American wars and the wars around the world, and how that was connected with labor, and what it meant to fight back privatization, what it meant to organize, but not just to organize, but to create organizers to organize. And to understand that when you had, if there was something an issue to organize around, to make sure that when you're leading people, you're not leading people without an end, without an accomplishment, a goal. Otherwise, you're misleading people. You have to lead people with the understanding of why they have to continue organizing and create organizers to achieve your mark and your goal. That was very important to him.
Well, let me ask you this. One of the things was that when the United Farm Workers movements first started, it was not immediately accepted by the broader labor movement. That was something that evolved later. When you look at the labor movement in California now, what do you see as some of the most significant changes between then and what you see now? Because, you know, from an environmental justice perspective, for example, we've had great difficulty with the building trades unions, who, like police unions, seem to be very willing to be out of step with the better interests of the working class as a whole. And they're only thinking about themselves. And in part, it's racism, because it's mostly, you know, non-college educated white guys. You know, has, in your understanding, has it always been those tensions, or is this something that has evolved over time?
Well, let's go back to history. The Civil Rights Act was implemented off of the basis of studying in all levels of institutions of higher education, labor, across the board. And they found evidence of discrimination and racism in unions. That's one reason why Title VI and the Civil Rights Act has been implemented, right? Because we know that the systemic racism includes these levels of discrimination and these levels of racism. We know it exists, and it exists in labor. Part of the problem with labor today is how strong the Democratic Party is involved and tied with labor. There's a lot of corporate money there. There's a lot of lobbying money there. We know this. We're preaching to the choir now. But the key issue here that I'd like to reference back is to understand what battle that you actually want to take. Now, my father and I, and with other comrades who passed over, Alex Garza and others, we were a part of an incredible part of history in California called the Caucus for Democratic Union, with Jim Hart and Kathy Hackett, who are still, you know, living in Sacramento. But they birthed CDU, Caucus for Democratic Union. And one of the reasons why was because at the time CSCA held on to the state of California workers' dues, and they're a retirement system. So we fought back very hard to establish a union for state government workers. So we were part of that birthing of SEIU Local 1000. Which took many years. But understanding the goal and understanding your reach is far more important than battling up against a current that is not going to change until the change comes within, right? And so we won that battle. We won it because we strategized, the momentum was on our side, and because we became very aggressive. And after losing affirmative action, we decided we need a union in order to protect those who came into state government. And we did it. We incorporated with SEIU, we have Local 1000, workers are protected. And of course, there's always room for improvement, but that was one of 3 unions we helped birth. That is a very difficult thing to do today. especially when unions today rely on not rank and file workers to control their own union. And my dad has said this over and over again. If you want to build a strong union and you are serious about controlling your union, then rank and file have to control it. This is one issue that he was very serious about. You know, unions that turn to a corporate mind and start functioning this way, you know, are driven by these type of policies, not by the workers. So workers taking control of their own union, rank and file, controlling their e-board and making those decisions at the table is far more important than anything else. Because only those workers understand what the day in the life of what a farm worker is, what a janitor is, what a you know, longshoreman worker is, a painter is, etc. Not the agent that they hired out of college to go and negotiate a contract when they don't know what it means to clean a toilet or to harvest fruits and vegetables to put on the plates of millions of people's homes.
Well, it replicates the classism in society and institutionalizes it within some of these unions, which then, you know, they began to act more like the capitalist corporations that they're supposed to fight rather than, you know, really doing what's right by the workers.
And defend. You know, the other thing is that let's look at this at an international level. There's no more room for romantics. There's no more room to play this down as, you know, a romantic part of history. Mm-hmm. We're in worse condition today than we have been in, you know, in a long time. But let's look at this at an international level. Okay, we all know how Labor Day came about. We all know that Labor Day came out of Chicago. We all know about, you know, the massive march of over 10,000 workers that came out in New York City that demonstrated to corporations when they left their jobs and said, "You don't pay me. I'm coming out for, you know, for labor rights, worker rights, for my family, for jobs, for the environment, everything." That scared the hell out of the corporations back then. And we got Labor Day, we got the 8-hour day, the Haymarket riots. We know about all this. But it's interesting that internationally in Mexico and France and Spain and all over the world, they are using this day as a very significant, powerful day to come out in the streets and to fight back and to say, we demand human rights, labor rights, and justices. You will not overwork us to the grind and dispose of us like we're garbage. We want the same thing everybody else wants in the world: a healthy family, healthcare, vacation, an 8-hour day, sick leave. Well, in the United States, let's talk about labor. A lot of labor in across the country, Chicago, Pennsylvania, New York, a lot of states that were very, very powerful labor states are no longer that anymore. The strongest standing state on labor and in unions is California. And look at what's happening right now in California. The special election. Why is there a special election? Because it's an attack on California, it's an attack on workers, and California is who pays for most of the bills across this nation.
That's
when
right.
You look at the federal minimum wage and the state minimum wage, there are states that do not implement a state minimum wage. You've got states like that are still using the federal minimum wage, like Alabama and Florida, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky. You know, that are using this federal minimum wage that keeps people living in poverty. But who do you think is paying for most of these bills? It's California. The cost of living, of course, it has increased. It's very expensive to live in California. We're fighting for the 15. But when you go into those states and you see the poverty in those states, it makes you wonder what the hell is going on here.
Well, it's interesting that they'll use a federal standard for wages and for labor but yet, you know, they're going to be the first states to stand up and say, states' rights, don't tell us about how we implement civil rights or how we implement voting rights and these kind of things. You know, it's that classical hypocrisy.
Absolutely it is. But $7.25, nobody could live off. No one can live off of that. In most of these states, they give you 20 hours a week, so they don't have to pay you any kind of overtime or sick leave. But let's talk about healthcare for all. And let's talk about labor and legislation. No legislation, any legislation written in California or in this country must include labor language that protects workers. Healthcare for all in California, if we got healthcare for all and we included language that protected workers and we created a platform for free education to be a nurse or a technician in the medical field, we're creating jobs. If we cut out the middleman in all these insurance companies with what California is investing, the matching funds with what people are investing, we have enough money to not only pay for free education and create jobs and protect workers and protect families, but also reinforce that everybody in our state has a healthcare for all. But we have to get it out of California first before we can even think about getting it nationally. By design, they want to push it nationally because they know that we won't get it that way. But California is key. And I encourage everybody to vote no on the recall. Look, I don't agree with everything about our governor, but our governor hasn't done that bad of a job to be recalled. And also, you know, let's remember that, the Republican Party put us in a deficit, okay? California was in a deficit for many reasons. We all know already. But do we really want to go back to that? Do we really want to go backwards? And for those who are listening, we are fighting not for what we want to gain. We're fighting today for what's left on the table, because we've lost so much. The government is not giving back anything anymore. The working class is paying for it. The working class paid for Afghanistan. The working class is paying for the privatizing jobs. The working class
and schools.
Exactly. The reason why we got out of Afghanistan has nothing to do with, leaving for good feelings. We're leaving because the United States is in an economic crisis and we cannot afford to be there anymore. The open checkbook war with no ledger. We will never know exactly how many trillions of dollars the taxpayers paid on that war to already crush a country that had already been broken with the 10 years of Russia being in there and other wars. There was no reason why we should have went into Afghanistan, but it was a way for corporations to make a lot of money off of
natural gas and opium.
Yeah.
I mean, the Taliban, before the Americans got there, eliminated opium, which was a historic crop there because of their religious values. But as soon as the United States pushed out the Taliban, there was more opium on the world market than ever before. And I think one of the things that you're really describing is a move towards a democratic socialist kind of economy and politics here in the United States that is practiced in most other so-called industrialized and advanced nations. And yet over here in the United States and in California, people are still red baited with that, trying to equate being, supporting socialism as being supporting Joseph Stalin. And of course it's ridiculous.
It's very ridiculous. It's very ridiculous because a lot of our social and federal programs were based on socialism, and people became millionaires off of it. Here's an example. Federal matching funds to states open up the market for contracting. bridges and freeways and roads and parks and federal parks and benches and water fountains. Those are all contracts. Prisons, toilet paper, toothpaste, you name it. Those are all contracts. And so when people participate in the contract process in each state, a lot of that money is federal money. They're not complaining about bidding on those contracts, are they? They're not complaining about that, right?
No.
Of course not.
They want to get their hands on it.
Because that was the stepping stone for them to become from a small business into a corporation. This is a fact. We know this, okay? The game here, though, is they control and they decide who is going to benefit and who will be at disadvantage. So they use these buzzwords like socialism or communism or red or whatever to be able to scare people. But look, let's face the facts here, okay? The majority of people who are on welfare are poor white people. The majority of people who are in prison are Black and brown and poor white people. The majority of people who are in ICE prisons today are immigrants, families seeking asylum. All of this industry is lining the pockets of somebody. Okay, the pockets of somebody. It's a
government operations.
It's a vicious cycle of privatization. It's a vicious cycle of foreign policy that has failed the workers in Central America, Mexico, and here, like NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. That is a failed policy that has hurt not only the environment, but workers, but it's caused forced migration. I'm wearing the Driscoll boycott button, the renew one that my father, this was his last button that he made, and he added Andrew Williamson to this button. It's boycott Driscoll's and Andrew Williamson berries. 70,000 farm workers are picking these berries in San Quintin, Baja California, Mexico. Indigenous, in Mexico, they say the original people. In Mexico alone, over 1,200 indigenous languages are spoken, and many of the indigenous population in Mexico don't even speak Spanish. But my point is that these foreign policies and agreements have created forced migration of the original peoples to go into neighboring states to harvest fruits and vegetables for very low wages, and into the United States for very low wages. And so the point here is that when you have a NAFTA agreement that by design, it forces communities, pueblos, people to have to relocate, force migrate, then you know that it is a formula for the modern day slavery. And this is what we fought against since 2006, is the NAFTA agreement. Now we have NAFTA 2.0, which is also a diabolical agreement, especially environmentally. I mean, they added language that helps pollute our Mother Earth. You know, our Mother Earth can't withstand the bombs anymore, or these type of corporate dumping anymore, and you know, at the cost of you know, workers being overworked. So
well, and we're now seeing, you know, I think what you're really describing is U.S. imperialism.
Of course.
Whether it's economic, whether it's military, whether it's political, and how it's transformed these societies, undermined these societies to be able to sustain themselves. And now we're paying the price for that. And now we're also paying the price for the environmental damage they've done, because, you know, I was in Mexico earlier this year and there were massive wildfires all over there, and nobody talks about that. You know, we don't get that news up here. And that, you know, there has been loss of fish because of the warming of the oceans. So the people who survive on fishing have had to been displaced and move around to try to make living. So this is just something that's multiplying and multiplying, and US imperialism as a force is now like British imperialism and Roman imperialism and Spanish imperialism. It's all starting to crumble from the edges, and it's coming home to roost. And
That's
so with that as a framework, I know this was supposed to have been a 15-20 minute conversation, but you're really providing a lot of profound answers here. Maybe, as a final wrap-up question here, how do we get back to a people-powered organizing and away from this model of labor unions who have consistently started to endorse business candidates, corporate candidates? Here in California, we have progressive Dems versus biz Dems. And, unfortunately, a lot of the biz Dems are Latinos who should know better, but they don't. They're vendidos, just like every culture has its own set of vendidos, right?
Hay traicioneros por donde quiera, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So here, my quick answer to this is, number one, rank and files have to organize in their unions. They have to be the deciding factor of the endorsement process of who they're going to represent on the basis of protecting workers, labor, and the movimiento. That's number one. Number two, it's in my opinion that the future is about multiple parties and parties aligning themselves on the issues, not so much the people, because the Democratic Party has done one successful thing. They have forgotten about the worker, the poor, the single mother, and about the rural areas in California. If you take a look at California, and if you study who's voting in California, it should scare the hell out of the Democratic Party and everybody, right?
Right.
And if there's anything that I have to say about this special election, is it's done one thing. For the first time, I have friends who are socialist, far left. I have friends who are in labor. I have friends who are in the Democratic Party. I have friends who are independent, and they're going to vote no on the recall. Why? Why are we all united on this? Because what the Republican Party is offering is absolutely dangerous. They're offering not only the reversal of a lot of what we work for, but also a federal minimum wage, and there's a lot at stake. So I think what's going to happen is what we're going to see in the next 10 years, 5 or 10 years, is you're going to see different parties popping up. And I think it should happen. Why? Because it's either going to send a strong message to the Democratic Party that they are not, they're not connecting with the working class. And I think it's time that we have a workers' party, a workers' party of people. I think it's a time that labor wake up and smell the roses of what's coming, but people are very angry and people are very upset about the foreign policies and about how much money is being dumped into other countries instead of our country. We're upset about the healthcare for all. We don't have healthcare for all for our elderly or for our citizens.
Tell me about it.
The elderly are suffering so badly just with dental alone. Mm-hmm. They'll pay to clean their teeth, but they will not pay for dentures. They won't pay for gum work. This is outrageous. They've worked their whole life and they can't get a root canal done without paying $2,000. This is a crime. This is a crime. Healthcare, I really believe strongly in healthcare for all, but it's going to take organizing on one issue and staying focused and driving that. And so what I'm saying about this recall is, let's pay attention to what is happening here. How is it that all of us came together? I have friends with PSL, the Green Party, the Democratic Party, people who are independent, who are voting no on this recall because we understand the threat. So what is it going to take for us to organize and be united like this? Well, we obviously have to feel that we are losing something, right? Well, we are. We've lost too much, and we're going to lose more. So it all falls into organizing. And it all falls into workers taking control of their unions and to organize in the community and to start organize as a pueblo in our own areas and districts and start electing through local government our true representatives. Mariko Yamada, who used to be the assembly member of District 4 in my region, who was a fierce fighter for the left, for the fierce fighter for people and for families, and did so much. But the party did not support her. The party didn't support me. I was a delegate for 2 terms, but the party fought me. How could the party fight me? I did get a lot of support from a lot of people inside the party, but the top fought me.
The
They
bosses.
didn't want me.
The bosses.
They didn't want me engaging, you know, and this is going to cost them because it wasn't just me, but it was a lot of other people statewide, progressives, Bernies that, you know, that didn't make it a 3rd term as a delegate. I can tell you I did a lot of work in support of labor and especially the IHSS workers out of Yolo County. They couldn't get to the negotiating table. LCLAA stepped up aggressively and we helped organize in our community with other organizations to get them there. We saved 3,000 jobs. And that's what it's going to take, is for the community inside their own area is to organize, but not to stop there, but to create other organizers so that the work continues. One of the biggest problems in our state and in this country is that we got comfortable. We got comfortable and we said, oh, we got it good. We got comfortable in the 80s. And then the 90s came and the crash came. The first crash through Wall Street came. The housing crisis came. The wars came. And here we are today. Here we are today. This party has moved so far to the right, it makes Ronald Reagan look like a liberal.
Right. Well, you know, one of the things that you mentioned is proportional representation. And of course, that's going to take a constitutional change because the US Constitution and the state constitution both are winner-take-all systems. And, you know, when you have that kind of system, what you end up with is like here in California, when one party is in favor and the other isn't, you end up with factions within the same tent, as opposed to competing power parties like you're suggesting. So we really need to move towards more of a proportional representation system, a parliamentary type of system, as opposed to the historic structure of winner take all that we have here in the United States. And the failure to do that means we're just going to be spinning our wheels doing the same thing we've been doing for decades now.
And it's happening. It's happening, brother. I can tell you, I have friends out of Detroit. They've created their own party and they're winning seats.
Yeah, well, I come from Richmond and we did that in Richmond, and it's been since 2003 that we created the Richmond Progressive Alliance, creating a party type of structure within a nonpartisan electoral environment. And we now have a working majority on the city council and have made tremendous strides to improve the lives of people. And
right on, and that's what it's going to take, and that is the power of that is the power of the pueblo. That truly is the pulse of the pueblo, because at that level you determine at the county level and at the city level where money goes, and that's what's most important.
We just redirected $6.3 million away from the police department and into prevention and supportive services for people in Richmond. So that's what it takes.
Yes, and I hope that other people in communities listen to what you're saying and they study what you have done, because this is the organizing work that has to happen. Now imagine if you took the Richmond Progressives, and I'm also a member of the California Progressive Alliance, and we're an ally, LCLAA's an ally, And we're also an ally to, you know, the Labor Fest of San Francisco and a lot of partners, right? And in Mexico, whatever, you know, all over the place internationally. But what happens when in our pueblo or in our state, we start organizing and we start working on one issue, like healthcare for all? Nothing's gonna stop us. We got this, right?
Right.
Like I tell people, we know how to fix the homeless problem. We know how to make sure that the food lines are not long lines. We've done this work before. Where it's at is exactly what you pointed out. That's where we do our best work, is when we take back our pueblos and our local governments and we start putting the money where it should go. And I tell people, they want you to get distracted with all the national issues and the politics. National politics is important to know. You need to know, but what's important is what's happening in your community.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, that sounds like a great place to wrap it up, Desiree. Desiree Rojas, and you know, once again, congratulations on that film about your father. It's important to remember these legacies because there are so many lessons for each generation to continue to learn. Every generation needs to learn the history. So I really appreciate your time tonight. It's been an honor having this conversation with you, and I hope our paths can cross again.
I want to say it was such a pleasure and such an honor to finally meet you, and I hope you invite me again. And I've heard your other news programs, and so I'm excited to be here. I want to say thank you also to Kate Ferreira, and also to the team that's making all this happen through the Facebook network, and not the Facebook, but the Zoom network, because that's a lot of work too. So thank you, everyone. Hasta la victoria.